I freeze in a terrible position.
Subtlety.
But good morning, everyone, and welcome to AMS Fest, our boot camp, implementation boot camp. It's going to be led by the team at A Church. Okay, I think my camera is delayed. I'm so sorry. I'm just going to go off camera here. A few quick notes, and then I'll let you guys get started. If you attended Delcor's boot camp on Tuesday, and I believe every single one of you did, we have sent out an email since then with the CAE code, but in case you missed it, it is Delcor, D-E-L-C-O-R, Delcor. But with that said, be sure you stick around until the end of today's boot camp when the team at A Church will announce the CAE code. After the boot camp today, you will receive a survey. This is where you can let us know what you thought of the event. Please tell us what you liked, what you didn't like. We want to make sure this event is ever changing and ever evolving to fit your needs. So please let us know. And then at the end of the survey, that's where you can actually put your CAE codes in, and a certificate will be emailed to you probably sometime next week. Just a quick note, I wish I was on camera, but a quick personal note from me and the entire team at Association Trends. I hope you all have enjoyed this event. I know virtual events are confusing and overwhelming, and we're all tired of them. So I just want to say that I appreciate your willingness and patience as we navigate. Hopefully one last time, we should be back in person this fall. So I want to thank you all. And with that, I'd like to introduce the entire team at A Church Consulting. I'm going to kick it back to Julie Davis, who they can start their boot camp, Life After Selection. Julie?
Thanks so much, Jamie. Well, welcome everyone. I am Julie Davis. I am the Director of Marketing, also do business development here with A Church Consulting. Before we get started, I'm going to give also, in addition to what Jamie said, some of our own housekeeping items. One, as you can tell, this is being recorded. And I do ask if you could keep yourselves on mute, unless you have a question. We definitely welcome questions. And please speak up. I would say raise your hand, but I'm going to confess it's a little tough with this many people. And then I know for me to be able to see your hand. So I know it might feel a little awkward, but either in the chat, which we are monitoring, if you have a question there, and then we can call on you, or if you want to just kind of unmute yourself and say, hey, I have a question, that works too. Also, I will be sending everyone a follow-up email that'll have a link to this recording so that you will have that. And then not to overwhelm you with surveys, but we also have a survey. And so for us, and so I was just wondering if you could just take, it's like 3 minutes tops, and just take that time to let us know your thoughts so that we can make sure we're hitting all the right notes and improving for the future. So that's my 2 cents right there. Now, I'd like if all of you would just in the chat, while we're introducing ourselves, if you could just take a second and introduce yourself, say hi, and just put in there one thing that you've come here to learn. And so again, we are monitoring the chat, and so we can reference back and get an understanding of what you'd like to learn. So now I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca A. Church. Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca A. Church, and thank you so much for spending your Friday or ending your Friday after a very long week with us. I hope that you've learned a lot from both the Delcor folks as well as the demos that you went through over the past couple of days at AMS Fest. I know that Association Trends does a really good job of trying to make the best use of your time, and we understand that's valuable and really appreciate that you're spending it with us this afternoon. So as I said, everybody, this is not my office. The irony is I'm on site actually doing an implementation right now. So a couple of rooms away, we've got a war room of sorts that's going on right now, and they're validating data, and we're going to talk a lot about what it takes to actually get to this point of going live. Ironically, this is our very first in-person go live since COVID. We've done several virtually, but this is the first time we've actually been back on site with our clients. So it's really interesting to kind of be in that situation and back in to kind of what we normally do. So a little bit about myself. Yes, I started A Church Consulting almost 6 years ago. And the whole reason for that is we saw that there was a gap in the market for actually helping people do the implementations. There are a lot of selection consultants out there, and they do great jobs. And, many of them are good friends. Everybody on this call knows it's a teeny tiny community. But after doing a very major implementation at the American Chemical Society, I thought, hey, this is a place that, I saw many of my colleagues and good friends struggling with having the internal resources of knowing what it's like to go through an implementation and being able to herd the cats, if you will, to have the delicate conversations, to know when to panic and when not to panic. And so really that's the genesis of why we started. We do other things and on top of that, but for the purposes of this conversation, that's really the focus. And since then we've grown, and to the people that are going to present with me today, also have deep experience in this, but the majority of our team on the implementation side have either been in your shoes or been on the vendor side. So we really do understand what it takes to implement software, specifically AMSs and the entire ecosystem that goes around it. I mean, you can call it digital transformation if you want to, but it really is all the transformation that comes with that. So that's a little bit about me. And so on the survey, the only thing I ask is that you not tell them that my jokes are really bad, because I already know that. So you can kind of give them you can just skip the bad jokes. So I'm going to pass it over to Marla, who is one of our partners in crime over here. Go ahead, Marla.
All right. Hi, I'm Marla Dockery. I'm a project manager with A Church Consulting, and I got my start about 25 years ago on working at various nonprofits and membership organizations. Ended up in my role as a membership manager at one of those organizations implementing an AMS. I'm not even sure we called it a project manager back then, but ended up then moving over to the vendor side, worked for an AMS vendor for about 10 years and then another implementer, and joined Rebecca and the team about 3 years ago, moving back to the client side and working with organizations such as yours, really hopefully implementing successful technology solutions. So I'm excited to talk with all of you today.
I guess I'll just jump in. I'm Beth Weston. I'm a BA with A Church Consulting, a business analyst with A Church Consulting. And I started working with Rebecca a million years ago at the Society. I was 10 at the time, so you can do the math. And so since then, I've joined A Church Consulting, and I have been helping other groups with their implementation. So I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, thank you. So
I think I'm the only one that's left. Hi, I'm Pam Talley. I am a project manager, program manager here at A Church, and have been one for 20 plus years, and have just recently joined A Church, leading a association that was doing an implementation. So I'm excited to participate with our clients moving that forward.
And one last but certainly not least, Tammy.
Thank you for that. Hi all. My name is Tammy Marco. I have been in the association space for about 15 years. I've been an IT director at 2 different associations, a trade association and individual membership. I've been through a wide variety of implementations and selections, including AMS, LMS, CMS, all of the MSs. But have been working with A Church, and I'm thrilled that you all are here to learn about the implementation process. So don't hesitate to reach out with questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So now today's lineup. So this is, we've got a lot to cover today. We will have some breaks in between and hopefully a little fun along the way. So we're going to start with completing your contract, then moving on to pre-discovery. And then from there, I need to move the chat box is blocking my view here, so sorry about that. Then we move on to discovery, shocking, after pre-discovery. And then we go into configuring the new system via the implementation itself, preparing for the launch, and then bringing that new system to life via launch day. So just in case, I did send everyone an email beforehand, in case you don't have it. These are just, you did not have to read this stuff beforehand. If you did, that's great. It gives you a little bit of context, but otherwise, these are the links here for you. I also, oh, this is a bad, sorry about that. Something got messed up. This is actually last year's links, but Pam can give you the links to the materials for this year and the updated ones. If you could put that in the chat, that'd be great. And now I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca. Rebecca, take it away.
Great. So we're going to make this, there's going to be a little talking so you guys are aware of the format. And then we are going to do some interactive sessions. So you're aware, we're going to do 2 breakout sessions to really kind of dive into some of the areas that we think are critical for being able to be successful in an implementation. So we'll have not only breaks, but a couple breakout sessions as well. And the majority of today is really going to be facilitated by Beth and Marla and myself. Tammy and Pam are here to help support. They're monitoring chat. They're doing some things like that. But we thought this really gives you exposure to the breadth and depth of our team, and to make sure that we are answering your questions along the way. So I didn't want you to think that Pam and Tammy aren't talking because, I don't know, I wanted to make sure that you were kind of aware that they're here to help in some of the breakout rooms and to make sure that we're doing our job and capturing some of these questions and answering things. So we're going to start off, and this may seem a little strange that we're starting off. Wait a minute, we're talking about a Clifton Strengths Assessment. What does this have to do with implementation? Why are we going here? What does this look like? And what I would encourage you to do right now is take a step back and say, I don't really care what sort of assessment it is, right? It could be Clifton Strengths, it could be DISC, it could be Myers-Briggs, it could be, one of the many. But what we know about implementations is that what people don't start to do or typically skip in the process is taking a step back and really thinking about what is the type of team I need to assemble and what are the strengths that they need to have in order to be successful. This is going to be a 9-month to a year-long journey to get you to launch. And then you're going to have another year of adoption probably after that to get you transitioned into the new system. And so what I find is that people are not necessarily thinking about it strategically as they go into creating their teams. So at A-Church Consulting, and we didn't do this at the beginning, but we're making it a part of our practice moving forward that with any new implementation, we're doing Clifton Strengths assessments of the core team. And we're doing that because it really does help for us understand what people do naturally. So what they're gravitating towards, how they learn, how they operate. Because when you're working this closely in a team, knowing both their strengths as well as their proclivities is really important for team synergy, for you to understand kind of how you're going to get velocity. Some of there's some questions in the chat about, how to overcome and get decisions made. Well, we consider this pivotal to getting to that step. So I'm going to kind of walk you through one way of thinking about this. Apply it, as I said, to whatever model that you guys have, but not doing this step at the beginning, we think is a big, it causes complications down the road that will slow down your project. So this is, again, we use Clifton Strengths. So if you go to the next slide, and here's why we do. Go to the next slide. So the reason why we do is it really looks at it in terms of 4 different domains. You've got executing, influencing, relation building, and strategic thinking. And so this is what people naturally gravitate towards. If you're into Clifton Strengths, what it'll tell you is everybody has all 34 characteristics. It's not that, you're not empathetic because it sits at 34. Of course we're empathetic, right? But there's some things that we gravitate to much more naturally, and we kind of live in those zones and skills and talents that we use every single day. And so when you're assembling your team, understanding that potentially somebody is very high in executing, the role that they play on the team, and how you can use that person to drive the project to conclusion is going to matter. On the influencing side, influence are those people that are great at selling an idea. This is the person that can go in and really, they're, I hate to say they're the car salesman, it's probably not the best persona that you want, But this is a person that can pitch something potentially to the rest of the team when they're not on board. So understanding kind of that you've got someone that's got that skill set that can get people on board, because that's one of the things we always, talk about that can be challenging to do. Your relationship builders in the Clifton Strengths kind of model, those are the people that are really looking kind of to be the glue, the tie that binds. So what does that look like? And then you've got your strategic thinkers that are, those are the people that are maybe poking holes at a particular idea. They're a person that wants more data. Their input is someone who says, hey, I need all this information before I'm going to go make this decision. So you can see how all of these would play out in a team as you're getting ready to go into such a large implementation on a large project. So we want to think about, how you can assemble a team that you've got the sort of balance, if you will. You've got some people that are thinking very strategically about where are we going, what's this going to look like at the end, how are we going to measure it. You've got executing people who are like, all right, let's get the tasks done. You've got relationship people that are there that are the glue that are making sure that souls are fed. And then you've got the influencers there that are helping sell that idea. So think about this when you are putting together your team. This is one kind of lens that we think you need to put on. And go ahead to the next slide. So once you kind of think about what is going to the talent side, then the other thing you want to think about is the roles that people can play on the team from a perspective. So it's a different lens. And so that's the other thing, when you're thinking about assembling your team, you really want to think about it from multiple facets. So when you have someone on the team, who are you identifying to be that historian? Because I know you don't necessarily want to change the way you've done, you don't want to do what you've done in the past, but you need to have someone who can tell you the why. Why is it that way? We call that the historian. Then you need a disruptor. So you need to have someone who's constantly challenging, someone who's saying, why are we doing it that way? We could do it, let's think big picture, let's think big vision. A contrarian and an expert. So the contrarian is poking holes. It's kind of that, well, we can't do that. Someone who's constantly kind of casting a little bit of shadow of doubt on kind of a new idea. And then an expert that really is someone who knows that particular domain. So this is the other lens that we think you need to think about when you're beginning to assemble your team. But the key to success for this is actually talking about it openly at the beginning of the project. So using this as a tool to begin to facilitate some common nomenclature to be able to call it out. Some examples that I would give is, Beth is a maximizer. So what Beth does is she makes every process better. So she is great at looking at something and saying, wait a minute, this is how we can do it better. Where Marla is input. And I can tell you, she's got a lot of executing, but she also has a lot of this strategy in her. So she's got high input and learner in her top 5. So when we were even putting together this presentation or practicing it today, Marla is going through it, and I'm already off on timing, but she is really getting into it. She's like, okay, what exactly are we trying to get to with this slide? What exactly is our message to this? So she's really trying to pull that out. And so I know that about her. And so that doesn't frustrate me because I know that she's an input and she needs that information in order to move to the next step, which is executing and making the decision. So having that kind of visibility and transparency into your team is really going to make a huge difference in your ability to be able to execute and be successful. So, so that's really exciting, kind of not exciting, but that's something I think you all need to know. So we'd say, hey, let's set the stage, let's build your team. So then the next stage is you've got your team together, and maybe your contract comes before this, but I think you need to start thinking about your team before then. So now that you've got your contract, you've got your team together, you really need to think about how am I going to be successful long-term? What is remember that Verizon commercial where, the guy stood up and they had the team Verizon, like that, everybody standing behind them. That's kind of what you want to think about when you're putting together your implementation team. You've got your AMS company, you potentially have an implementation partner because some of them are using third parties for this. You may have a third-party consultant like us, and then you also have access to users group and network and to the network. So you really want to think about who am I using? What are the culture, that we want that we want to create, and then how we're going to begin to engage them. So this is something you want to think about as you're building out and before you actually sign your contract, or while you're signing your contract with your AMS company, because how you go about this is going to matter. The roles and responsibilities for the implementation partner, for a third-party consultant, for your AMS company will change depending on the constellation of how you actually form that team. So think strategically about who you need on your side in order to be successful with that. So we'll head to the next slide. If you didn't cover this in your in the stuff that you did with Gretchen, the next thing you want to do, I want to go ahead into the next slide, Julie, is when you're reviewing the contract, there are a couple of things you really, really want to look at. And they can kind of slide these in. It's just something that everybody needs to be comfortable with. Really look at that fee structure in detail. Every single one is slightly different. There are additional licenses depending, like, so for example, with the Salesforce platform, you're going to have community licenses. You're going to need to understand your API calls to make sure that you're not going to hit limits on those. You need to understand what your admin license fees are, what your standard license fees are. So you really need to look at that structure, think about the ecosystem you're trying to build out, and understand, in addition to kind of what I'm going to call your basic license fees, are there add-ons that you need in order to be successful that perhaps you have or have not budgeted for? I wouldn't call them hidden costs, but they're not exactly clear to you all the time. So you want to be engaging with your consultants or with your AMS company to really make sure that you're teasing that out to see what sort of future costs that you're going to have in the future, so you can really determine your total cost of ownership. So make sure you understand that fee structure for all of the facets. Also look at the years in the terms of the agreement. You know, there are some contracts, and we don't see this as much with AMSs, but I'll give you an example. There's another group that, you know, another piece of software, and they're constantly slapping a 4-year agreement on you. Well, right now that may be just fine. You know, with your AMS, I don't see people typically getting out, you know, in less than, 4 to 5 years. But you really want to think about how many years am I signing this agreement for? What's the escalation clause for my license fees on an annual basis at the time of renewal or at the time of recontract? So that's another thing you really want to look at in your contract to make sure that you can kind of put a little bit of a cap on that. We're typically seeing about a 5 to a 5.5% increase is what's kind of normal, is what I'm seeing in most license agreements these days. So how long is the agreement, and am I comfortable with the ongoing escalation fees costs that are in there, to make sure that you don't have a substantial jump. You know, you think about health insurance today. What you don't want to do is have a contract, you go, you're done with your agreement, and then they get up the prices on you 15, 20%. I haven't really seen that happen, but it's something that, we want you to be aware of it. Are you comfortable with those agreements? And then, this is kind of, we've already hit on this a little bit of it, really plan for growth. So since we are in cloud-based, which is one of the major changes that is taking place, so have you planned to scale? Have you planned for additional database sizes? Because you're going to be in that, maybe in Azure, if you're sitting on that Dynamics platform, you're going to be in the Sales Cloud or in Salesforce if you've got storage space there. So really do think about what that plan for scale is going to look like, so that you've got that budget sort of laid out. This is the one area that I feel like most organizations only think about things up to go live, and that's why we call this life after selection. I mean, we're really trying to think about how are you preparing your organization for long-term success? Because if you've now just potentially contracted or selected an AMS that you can't afford to do years down the road because of accelerated growth, that's going to be a problem. So really think about what are those 3 to 5 year costs and plan for growth moving forward. Okay, want to head to the next one. Oh, so the other thing that we also find that people are not thinking about is really what's going to be in the operating and the capital expense. So we used to go by SOP 98. There's a new one, and I can't remember the exact name of it right now. AICPA's SOP 98 is still pretty close to the standard, but all the configuration that you're doing within one of these platforms, you can capitalize that configuration. If you're using an external vendor in order to help with the implementation, that can be a capitalized cost. So one of the things that we'd encourage you to do is really sit down and think about what that amortization schedule is going to look like, because you're, if you're not in the position of being the senior manager or the executive director, your board and your ED is really going to understand what those costs are going to be, how it's going to hit both cash flow as well as your P&L. So identify those operating expenses as well as your capital expenses. And if you didn't hear this in the selection, you need to prepare for a minimum of a 20% contingency for unexpected items. Today with the fluidity of how business is changing and what's happening, I would never recommend to anybody that they have a contingency budget that's less than 20%. I actually think that 20% is cutting it a little close these days. To be frank, I wouldn't say that the AMS vendors do it intentionally, but we know that during the selection, we're looking for fit. And I'm sure you heard that, and you even heard Wes, if you came to Wes's thing on Wednesday, he really talks about, we want you to be able to go in and know that you're in a solution that you can grow with, and you've got two really great options, to be in there. Great. But you're not getting into the infinitesimal detail. You're getting into the broad brush strokes to do that selection. Can I run my business through that? And so what's teased out, and I think I want to be really clear about this, what gets teased out in the discovery and the real requirements are those little nitty-gritty details that don't come up in the selection, and those are the gotchas. And some of those really should be left behind, but some of those you're going to have to go forward with. And there's no way, frankly, that any AMS provider can really plan and budget appropriately for those during the discovery process. So definitely have a contingency fee, a contingency budget that's sitting there for integrations, for unplanned custom configuration, for delays, for whatever you need to do. So make sure that that's in there. All right, so before we go forward, kind of hit a little bit about the contract and about your team. Wanted to pause for a moment and see if anybody had any questions. Quiet group today, not used to this. Okay, we'll cut it out to everybody being tired. So go ahead, anything in the SOP 98, yes, that's correct, Andrew. And it's old, that's back from the 90s. I have an updated version. The SOP 98 gives you some of it. So for example, I'll do, the old one is SOP 98. So for example, you can't capitalize the actual data conversion process. You can't capitalize training. You can capitalize testing, and you can capitalize, external PM, and you can capitalize the configuration of the platform and the customization of the platform. But you can't capitalize data conversion, and you can't capitalize training. Those are the biggies that people are not thinking about sometimes, and will get kind of caught in a little gotcha because they think they can capitalize the entire implementation, and you can't. So those are two things that you need to be aware of, not that data conversion. Those are the biggies that I find that some people are not aware of when they do that. Testing can, yes, that's correct. Testing can, 100%. Great question.
And then
There
Sarah
was a quick
asked-
question.
Yeah.
Sorry, Julie. Yeah, Sarah asked, do some consultants do strength training for the client, or is that something that the client does internally, like the Clifton Strengths?
I'm unaware of any other consulting group out there that does Clifton Strengths other than us. We do put that into the way we kick off an implementation. Otherwise, you can rely on internal services to do that within your organization. So give you my Clifton Strengths. I lead with relationships, and my second is executing. And so that's the reason why we've chosen to take that on as something that we think is important for the long-term success of the project. And so we include that in our kickoff. Okay, so once you've got your team done, so you've got your team selected and you have your contract ratified and everybody's very anxious to go. So what's next? So we begin with really kind of that pre-discovery project charter. We believe that this activity, oh, this is Marla, should happen.
That's okay.
Marla.
Yeah,
We
that's
believe that this
okay.
activity should happen prior to bringing in your vendor, and Marla's going to tell you why.
Yep. So you've come off the sales process, you've made your selection of the vendor that you're going to use. And so as Rebecca mentioned, there are some things that you need to do to get ready before you move into discovery. So one of the things you should be thinking about is your project charter. And all that is a short high-level document that describes your project and how your project's going to be carried out. And it's important to take some time to do that up front because that's going to be something that you refer back to through the course of the project life cycle. So we've just listed some things here that should include goals and objectives, what's in scope for the project. And what I have found, sometimes people just focus on what's in scope, and just as important sometimes is to detail what's not in scope. You should, if you can, include high-level success criteria, things that are measurable and achievable to help you know at the end of the day if your project was successful. Sometimes it's hard to do that up front at this stage, and so we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into the details of discovery. You want to make sure you capture who's involved. So of course, your stakeholders, your team members, and project sponsors. And I should mention, in case you haven't heard that term project sponsor before, that's typically who owns the project, really more from a strategic standpoint. They're not necessarily going to be involved in the day-to-day implementation of the project. And probably even more importantly, usually the project sponsor is the person who's paying for the implementation. You should include the high-level timeline. So of course, this is not your detailed project plan yet, because you don't know what your project plan is yet, but you should have an idea of the high-level timeline from your discussions with the vendor during the sales process, and start thinking about any schedule considerations. So things like blackout dates. If you know 2 weeks in November, your staff is going to be consumed with the annual conference. It's that kind of thing to detail in the charter. And lastly, I know you're super excited about getting started with your implementation, and probably the last thing you want to be thinking about is all the potential things that could go wrong. But it's good to start thinking about project risks, getting those detailed, and be thinking about your mitigation plan so that you're going to be ready if those things do arise during the course of your project, that you've already got something in place to deal with those things. So then we're going to move on, Julie, to the next slide and talk a little bit now moving into building your team. And the first thing to be thinking about is you are going to be transitioning in a couple of different ways. First, on the vendor side, most likely they're going to be handing you off from the sales team to their services team. So you're going to be working with different folks on that side. On your side, you may be introducing new team members. Typically, I think sometimes smaller groups of your fellow colleagues are involved in that selection process. So be thinking about who's going to be involved moving forward in discovery and implementation. So be thinking about getting those people up to speed. And last, just be thinking about cultural expectations in terms of your org culture as you move forward with your vendor. The vendors work with a lot of different types of clients, lots of different organizations. So be thinking, what's important to you so that you really get your, things off on the right foot with the vendor. For example, if everybody's been doing Zoom meetings over the last year, if it's important for your vendor to be on camera, it's that kind of thing that you want to set expectations for. So moving on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about defining the team roles. So of course, you're going to have a project manager, someone who's driving the implementation. You're going to have subject matter experts who are going to be weighing in on the details of what you need. There's other folks that maybe aren't going to be as involved, but maybe you're going to be reaching out to have them consult or advise the team on how you're moving forward, or other folks that maybe just need to be informed. So be thinking about all those roles, how involved they are, and what the time commitment is, because you want to make sure, especially your PM and those subject matter experts, that they understand what the time and commitment is for their involvement on the project. And lastly, I think we tend to think, really narrowly about, well, the internal team. Be thinking about if there are other folks that you need to involve outside of your organization. And maybe a good example is including members. Maybe, you want to pull them in to do maybe sort of a pilot, or involve them in some of your testing for an online component to really get their input there. So just be thinking, a little bit wider outside of your organization, and see if that makes sense for your project. So moving on to talking then about building the team a little bit, and we're going to tie this part to kind of what Rebecca was talking about with the strengths. In my introduction, I mentioned that I was the membership manager at one of my organizations, and by default, I became the PM for that project. And be thinking about, I think we all tend to think about someone's role at the organization and think about that in terms of the fit for the project team, but be thinking a little bit more about, pulling the team together based on the strengths that they bring to the table. And I know sometimes maybe you can't pick your team, maybe you're a smaller organization and you sort of get who you get. So in that case, just be thinking about, well, how do you build a strong team and take advantage and leverage the strengths that people have? And Rebecca, I'll have you chime in a little bit more about building the team in light of, our conversation earlier about the Clifton strengths.
Absolutely. So before I go into that, I want to do a little recap of some of the stuff and points of emphasis on some of the things that Marla has already covered. So in this pre-discovery, first is, we really do believe that this is important. Because it's a time for your team to gel, and this is going to get in a little bit of the strengths, but it's a time for your team to actually make that transition from selection to implementation and begin to make that mental shift of what's going to be there. One of the questions we're frequently asked is, do I need to really have a PM internally? The answer to that is absolutely yes. You must have a conductor. You can call them whatever you want, but you need to have someone that's boots on the ground, that's leading with you internally to make sure that everybody's doing what they're going to be doing. And we're going to get into this in implementation, but having that person identified and saying it loud and proud and setting that stage during pre-discovery with your organization is critical for success, because it really allows everybody in the organization to know what that role and responsibility is of that individual. And we're going to get into what you're going to look for in that person here in just a second. So then the other question we're frequently asked is, how much time is it going to take? The answer to that is more than you would ever expect. More than you would ever expect. There are people, when I was at ACS, it was a full-time job, and we had, it's a different size organization, I get it. We had 15 people working full-time on this project, 15. So the idea that this is an add-on, which kind of gets to Marla's point, is really, you need to be thinking about what that looks like. How are you? How is the organization shifting responsibilities or tasks to other people in order to be successful? And the time to have those conversations is during the pre-discovery, because that's when people are really going to be talking openly. It's, the phrase we use, that's when calmer and cooler heads prevail. Because the minute you get into the major implementation tasks, people are operating more from the amygdala than they are from the other parts of the brain. They're thinking much more logically. So you don't want them going into fight or flight. We want them having these conversations now when they're feeling, hey, yeah, I understand what's going in here. We want them thinking with the logical part of their brains. So the other thing that's really important and the point of emphasis is that project sponsor, because not only are they paying for it, but they're the point of escalation. So they need to understand that role and responsibility, that project sponsor, is when the team gets stuck, We're pulling out that charter, as Marla said, and we're going to say, this is what's going to be most important. We agree to this. It's not that it can't change, because it can change. That's fine. But we have an agreement that we started at. And if we're going to deviate from the agreement, then we need to have a conversation about how we're deviating from the agreement. Again, and what it allows us to do is have a document that we can use, takes it out of the emotional and into the data. And so someone asked again in the chat early on, how do we keep people on track? How do we help people be successful? That these pre-steps are critical for that, because what these pre-steps do is it allows you to have something to come back to that says this was our agreement, and it takes it out of emotional and into database and into a logical conversation, and that's how you keep things on track. All right, is that, so I have a question, is that called a benefits utilization sheet? You can have benefits in there. I've never heard it referred to as a benefits utilization. Marla, you or Beth ever heard it referred to that?
No, that's I haven't heard of that before.
Okay. So in building the team, and this is going to tee up, I know she already went to the next slide. So you've heard us talk a little bit about the strengths. So in our way of having a little bit of fun here, we put together this fake project team and the space organization, and we're gonna talk a little bit about what they bring to the table. Go ahead, Marla.
I was just simply going to say, you know, Dorothy might have been in the same boat that I was many years ago, where she was the director of membership and somebody thought, well, hey, it's your database. You own most of it. You know, it's a membership based organization. So she was designated as the PM. You've got the rest of the team representing, you know, the key departments at the National Association of Disney Characters. I'm sure everybody has heard of that group. But I think moving on to the next slide, we'll really be able to see, well, is Dorothy really the right fit? What are her strengths? What does she bring to the table? And take a look at the other folks on the team here. And I think, Rebecca, you're going to talk a little bit more about what we're looking at here.
Absolutely. So this is, again, I don't care what you use, just use something, doesn't matter. So in this case, you know, what do we know about Dorothy? We know that Dorothy sits high in both executing and relationship building. So yes, she is the membership person, but she also brings some great strengths to the table in terms of executing. So that's a great thing. So then we kind of look at Dwight and kind of what he brings to the table. So we may want to call out that, hey, Dwight, you need to be our future thinker. You want to think about, hey, where are we going? What does that look like? And so when we look at this profile, we also think, hey, Dwight may need a little more information to get to the point that he's going to be comfortable making that decision, right? He's got input and intellection in there. So those are people that want, you know, a lot of data, and then they want to think about it. They kind of want to, you know, ruminate on it a little bit. So we need to understand that potentially, you know, if Dwight is leading a section, that we need to front load a whole bunch of data for him to get to this decision. That's potentially how we're going to keep it on track. And if we allow him to make a whole lot of changes in the middle, he may do that. So those are things that you want to be aware of. You know, you look at someone like Titus, and he's got, you know, I'm looking at him and he's got command and self-assurance and competition. So I look at someone like Titus, he may be a great person even to go test. Why? Because he's going to want to test better, faster, quicker than everybody else, and he's going to want to tell everybody about it. So I see someone like Titus, and I'm like, great person potentially to really get involved in testing, you know, because he's going to, you know, he likes consistency, which is great. So he wants to see things. He's got a script. He knows what to do. And then you've got along with that, hey, maybe he can go sell it. So if you're doing kind of group testing, he could be a great cheerleader to bring everybody on board. So you can kind of see how this kind of goes along, and it, you know, maybe those aren't all the right things, but how you can use it as a facilitation tool. If I'm Dorothy, I'm going to go to Titus and I'm going to say, hey, Titus, what would you think about leading all that testing for us? I think you do a great job of that. You could really go sell it. Why don't you go sell this new SOP? We need to go change the way we're doing things. So you can kind of see how we can use these together in order to bring the team. So that's kind of, you know, kind of where we're going to go, and we're going to break out into some breakout groups now and talk a little bit about your team. So I know you all are at different points in the process. I happen to know that there's at least one person on this call that's actually selected their AMS, and there's probably in the process of beginning to build their implementation team. So when you think about this, and we don't have to reference the Disney characters, but when we break up, let's talk about your team in general. And do you see these characteristics in your teams? And how do you think that you can leverage and get the best out of your group moving forward? Just kind of do that analysis. So I think, Julie, you're going to throw us off into the.
I am, and just full disclosure, I'm not great at doing these breakout designations. So, yeah. So hopefully,
I have faith in you, Julie.
I'm scared. Okay. Here we go.
I think that's the first time I've actually been kicked out of one of the breakout rooms.
And it looks like, did everybody make it back?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
I don't see Rebecca.
I'm here.
Oh, you moved on my panel. Shame on you.
Everybody. So I'm curious, what were some of those aha moments, or anything willing to talk up about what you talked about in the breakout, or things that you thought about or discussed? Why don't we start with you, Marla? With your team.
Just muted myself. Our team, we talked a little bit just about the cross-departmental, sort of finding that balance between, having the representation that you need to have across departments, and then balancing that with the strengths. So just kind of thinking through, how do you best accomplish that?
Gotcha. And so Tammy, you want to talk a little bit about what we talked about? I'm getting tired of talking.
Oh, sure. So we talked a lot about the team itself and making sure that the right team is selected, and any gaps. And so we talked that there were typically gaps from a project management perspective and a business analyst perspective. Those are two very key roles for an implementation. And then we also talked about having good standard operating procedures, which are very important after you go live, to make sure that the procedures are followed in the correct manner so that your data stays clean.
There we go. So we're going to take a little break here, but we hope that kind of the first part, and you haven't even really started your implementation yet. So far we've covered that, what you need to look for in the contract, how you need to build the team, what that's going to look like, and making sure that you've got the right resources available, like really getting that prep work in before you start the implementation. So now after we come back, we're really going to dive into what it's going to work like with your vendor, and how you're going to begin to work with your solution providers on that front. But how long are we going to break for? Because this is 3 hours, so we want to take
10
some
minutes.
breaks, allow everybody to get a little water, walk around, check their email, and then come back in 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
And also do all the stretches on the slide here.
That's right.
So everybody must complete all of these exercises.
I think I want to know how he's doing the very top one without rolling all over the floor. Those are the ones that I
It's
never
true.
could understand.
He
Exactly.
locked the wheels. There's like a little lock that we can't
Okay.
That
see.
must be it. Yes, that's
I
exactly.
just want to know, can we turn our video off before
Yes.
we do that?
That's right. Exactly.
That's okay. So
right.
we'll see you guys in 10 minutes.
And I know, oh, there we go. I guess I should
Sorry about
start
that. I
over
paused
again.
the recording and it won't let me do it unless, so I'm sorry
Okay.
about that. Everybody.
So Julie will bring the slide deck back up, but
There it is. Sorry.
each vendor has their own term for this phase, and really at a high level, it's your chance to talk about what you do and what you want from the system, and for the vendor to capture this into kind of their to-do list, which ends up becoming your requirements. So typically there's a kickoff. They typically have some sort of questionnaire that they're going to ask you to complete. That will move on to having more in-depth conversations with you and your team. And then they'll take all of that information together, pull together a requirement document that they'll review with you, and then you'll get your estimate based on that document, and then you'll make your decisions on what's going to be implemented. So we'll move on, Julie, to the next slide and talk about your discovery kickoff. So we talked earlier about, having some changes or transitions in the team. So this is really the first time your services vendor team is going to be together to meet your full team. And in addition, you're going to have your project sponsor there. Should be great opportunity to include that person or persons to make sure that they can show their full support for the project moving forward. So typically what you cover at this kickoff, of course, you're going to introduce everybody, talk about people's roles and responsibilities, go over goals and objectives, the high-level timeline, scope, and I'll continue to make my pitch of what's in scope as well as what's out of scope. And then if you were able to pull together some high-level success criteria, you can talk about that at this time too. And just a reminder, this all ties back to the project charter that you pulled together before you moved into discovery. And it's really just a great opportunity for everybody to kind of level set, be on the same page as you move forward in this discovery process. Typically, the vendor also is going to speak to kind of what their approach is for discovery as you move forward. And then you'll all talk about, of course, what your next steps are. So that leads on to the next slide and talking specifically about the questionnaire. So almost think about this as sort of the vendor's RFP. They're focused on, what what the system needs to do. They're not necessarily thinking about from your perspective, the why. So just be thinking about that if you can, include as much information here as possible. And also don't make any assumptions that, well, I don't need to tell them everything because, we were really thorough in our sales process and having those conversations. Just remember, even though they hand it off from their sales team to their service team, it's still, up to you to make sure that you're crystal clear and give them all the information that you think they need to move forward. And just at a high level, they typically are going to ask for, an overview of the department, what your current systems are, pain points, both from your standpoint as well as your customers or your members. And then typically they have some questions that are sort of life cycle, day in the life process type of questions. So we will move on then to talk a little bit more specifically about how your team can prepare for the interviews. So of course, the first thing should be pretty obvious. You want to identify those topic areas or departments that you want to focus on. You need to be thinking about who needs to attend. Sometimes you may be so focused on your current AMS users that, you may be thinking, well, down the road, maybe we're expanding some of the functionality with the new system. So just be thinking about maybe you need to cast a slightly wider net for your discovery interviews. In terms of scheduling, I know from personal experience on projects, sometimes that's the hardest part of getting ready for the interviews. So I would urge you not to delay in getting on people's calendars, especially if you are working with a large group. And make sure that you send the questionnaire to everybody ahead of time. And, typically you're going to send the questionnaire out to the folks participating in the interviews, and most likely the vendor's going to want those completed back before they move on to actually having the interviews. So moving on to talk about getting people prepared for the interviews, just as a starting point, and we don't have it detailed on the slide, but everybody should start with reviewing and using the documentation that you pulled together in the sales process from your sales RFP. I mentioned it on this last slide, but I will repeat myself just to remind you, you may be repeating yourself. So don't assume that, well, I put it in the questionnaire. Just make sure in the interviews that you're being clear and making sure that you're getting all the details out of what you're looking for. It's not surprising that the vendor you're working with is going to use slightly different terminology in your meetings. So you might be used to, thinking about individuals and organizations. In their system, it might be contacts and accounts. So I know that's a simple example, but just getting people prepared that there might be some terminology differences moving forward. Thinking about, talking about what you need. The why is just as important, and I don't remember if I mentioned it on the last slide, but definitely make sure you're giving the context to the vendors. That's super important. Sometimes the context gives them a little bit more vision and understanding, beyond just the details of what you're looking for. In your conversations, don't hide pain points. You might think like, well, I don't need to worry, talk about, how horrible my current fulfillment process is because I'm going to a new system. You want to make sure that you're putting those pain points out there to make sure that there is a solution and a better way, hopefully, in the new system of doing that process. Make sure that folks are focused on the to be state, not the as is. And what that really means is you're not looking to recreate the system that you have now. At least I don't think you are. Most likely you're moving to a new system because you need something in place that's a little different. And lastly, think about drawing pictures. What's the phrase, a picture is worth a 1,000 words. Sometimes if something's super complex, you're not going to get the right, viewpoint of that if you're just focused on the words. And Beth is going to, I think, lead the next couple of slides, really talking a little bit more about some of these diagrams or how to draw a picture.
So before you actually go on, so Marla, how many, what do those interviews look like, those discoveries? Should they, should they plan to talk about things for several hours? Or are they 30 minutes? What do you typically see?
I would say it depends, probably more like an hour and a half. I don't think they're short conversations. I think, and I should mention, a lot of vendors want to go through those topics in a certain order, maybe starting with the overall basic CRM, your individuals and orgs, that sort of information, and then kind of building on that. But typically, they're not quick conversations. You're going to be driving into a lot of detail. So a lot of times it's more like an hour and a half type of a session.
Okay. And then I think the other thing to be aware of here is, Marla mentioned context a couple of times, but we cannot emphasize that enough. So if they ask you for, you've got the questionnaires, which is really just kind of very, very driving to the point, the data points. If you have some of that written context that you can give them as supplementary information, that's really, if you have it, you should definitely send it along too. Just because they don't ask for it doesn't mean you can't give it to them. So I think that's a really important thing to understand. I think people are hesitant to send things that are not asked for, but if they're valuable and can provide context, we definitely want to go that route. So don't be worried about sending them more information than they're actually requesting. That is actually a benefit to them, and they'll generally welcome that. And then the only other way that I would summarize what Marla already has is, when she talked about the as is to the to be state. Really think about what you need at the end. What is the outcome? Not necessarily about the process. That's a place that we see a lot of people get stuck in the discovery phase, is they think, and this is why the stuff that Beth's about to tee up is so important, because a lot of people think about, well, this is what I do today. Well, it's shifting that mind from this is what I do today, that this is what I need to have happen. I need this member type to be assigned. I need registration to take it, to take place. So it's a very different sort of conversation than always repeating what it is you've done. So, but Beth is our picture woman. So I'm going to toss it over to Beth because, as I said, we think that these are very helpful in being able to effectively communicate something other than words.
Well, Marla stole my line. I was going to say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but now it just seems repetitive.
You could say a million words.
But diagrams and pictures really are important. They really can enhance the understanding of a system or a process in a way that words can't do. Use a drawing to explain a technical system. We've all seen these system diagrams, but they are extremely useful in describing your overall system and how each piece interacts with each other. The drawing helps to explain the complicated technical flows to those who are kind of less technically inclined. Next slide, Julie, please. Now, you don't have to just restrict your diagrams to your system diagrams. They can also be used to translate complicated processes they can be used to consider taking a complicated system and translating into a workflow diagram like you see here. A workflow diagram is great because it defines each step of your process and identifies the order in which each step occurs. As you're developing these, as you're working through them, you may discover that you have several inefficiencies that you weren't aware of, that maybe you have some duplicated steps, or you have an overall hole in the process, so it's not working as well as it could. Afterwards, look at it. Are there ways that you could tweak this process once you have it diagrammed? You could tweak it to make it more efficient, or you can maximize your processes. People learn differently. So you may find that many people within your organization will more fully understand a topic or a process after they view it in a diagram format. Highly encourage it. You can diagram anything, honestly. I have done it actually. Okay, so use a diagram. They're great. Next slide, please. Okay.
Sorry, that's me.
One.
Yep.
Exactly.
It's
So
Miss-
we talked about this when we were looking at the charter, and now that you're in discovery, it gives you a little bit more of an opportunity to drill down into those details and start to kind of get a bigger picture of what success looks like for you and for the project. So you want to make sure that you're identifying things that are measurable, things that are accomplishable or achievable, and want to make sure that the team and sponsor are all bought in on that. In other words, you want to make sure that you all have defined success the same way. Of course, once you defined your success criteria, that's going to help guide decisions throughout the implementation. And when you get through your implementation and go live and you're getting ready to close your project, it's great to be able to check off the list of, well, here are all the things that we achieved. You may be thinking, well, what's measurable and accomplishable? What do those kind of things mean? It's basically, you want to be able to clearly articulate, did we meet this? So it's a kind of thing of, members needing to have the ability to log in and access purchased digital products. Maybe another one is the finance team needs to be able to close the month after month end close within a day. Those kind of things that you can clearly say either yes, they happened, or no, they didn't. Oh, and I should mention, not just, I guess I just did, guides decisions during the implementation as much as at the end of the day after the project, being able to easily check off that you had success there. So sorry, Beth.
While you're doing everything else, also create a report inventory. Reach out to all of your departments, talk to everyone, find out what reports they're currently using, and then take it one step further and ask them how and why they are using these reports. Hopefully, this will get people to start thinking critically about the reports. And instead of just saying, it's important because I've always had it, make them tell you why it's important. This is also the time to set the expectations with your team about reports. Reports are going to be completed near the end of the project, so the expectation shouldn't be that they're going to have them immediately. Also, let them know that they may not be getting the exact same set of reports that they had before. The new AMS may have native functionality that may meet a data need, so that report may no longer be necessary. That's important to convey to your team as well, especially if they can have to hold on and latch on to all of the documents they used to have. Next slide, Julie.
All right. I think that's me. So, building on of what Beth said, we do find that reports causes a ton of consternation for people because they're very accustomed to having the reports that they have. So Beth's exactly right. A lot of the more modern systems, you're not having to actually create reports. You're able to use the internal tools. So that inventory allows you to really kind of bump it up against, okay, what's actually offered in the system without having to recreate, because you can spend a lot of time spinning on reports when you don't have to. There's also you'll see there's going to be a push. There's a lot of pressure a lot of times that people want their reports early. You actually really do want to push that back towards the end, and because so the reason why we say let's get that inventory at the beginning is as you kind of go through the process, then you can see, okay, here are the different approaches that we're going to take for output. So we try to shift the word from reports to output, because that begins to change. So with the old time, all we had were reports. That's all we had. Now you potentially have dashboards, you've got other sorts of query tools, there's lots of other things happening. So having that inventory, we think, lowers the energy and the concern about, hey, I'm not going to have this report need met. So we go that route. So we've got the inventory, and we can begin to think about how we're going to approach that throughout the process, instead of feeling like we need to scope out the requirements and the full on effort for those at the beginning. Similarly, you've got to think about integrations, and I'd say it's almost the opposite of reports, where really for your reports, you want to get an inventory so you can figure out how you're going to use them. With integrations, we find this to be a long pole in the tent. We find that a lot of people start their integration process too late and don't really understand what it's like. So we push this up and say, at the beginning in your discovery, make sure that you are talking about integrations with all of your vendors. So again, there's a lot of times when we're talking about it with our AMS provider, make sure that you're talking about it with your other providers as well. Give them the timeline, let them know what's there, and revisit whether or not you're going to need those. Because again, a lot of times you consider, hey, this is part of a larger digital transformation. Maybe I'm going to upgrade a system, downgrade a system, connect it to something else. So we want to really think about what's needed for phase one, how you're going to approach it, making sure that your other vendor, your other third parties are aware of what's going on, and that they are aware of the timeline that's coming. So definitely want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with that. With integrations, we find that this is typically not thought about this stage, and can bite people towards the end of an implementation if they haven't allowed for enough timeline in order to execute the tasks. Go to the next slide. Oh, you're on mute, Beth.
Well, I want to talk about data anyway. Now, data is extremely important. And the first response to the question, how much data do you want to migrate to the new system, is always all of it. We need it all. But in most cases, that really isn't the best answer. If you've been using your AMS for a while, there's a good chance that a lot of your data has become old and outdated, or even unused. You don't want to clutter up your new AMS with migrating data that is unused and is old. Okay, you don't want to pay to migrate data that you will never use. Be sure to identify all of your data sources first. You can reference your system diagram that you've created. Besides your AMS, you have other systems that might be storing data about your membership. Maybe you want to convert that data into your AMS as well. Think about things such as your external registration systems. You can also consider that some business units may be managing their important data via Excel spreadsheets. You may want to think about converting these too. Once you've identified all of your data sources, there are some pieces of information that very obviously will be needed to be migrated to the new system, such as current year financials. There are going to be some other pieces of data, however, that might not be so obvious, such as demographic data or more historical data. In these cases, take a hard, objective look at the data to help you determine if it should be migrated to the new system. Here are some of the questions you should be asking about that data. Does it have value to your organization? Is the data providing an accurate picture of your constituents? Does it drive a business process or decision? And are you actively using that field? If your data isn't providing you any of these things, that's a strong indicator that you don't need to migrate it. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Now that you've determined what data you need, you should now look at your data holistically. Does your data need to be cleaned? Do you have duplicates? Do you have incomplete records? Are your field formats inconsistent and non-standardized? Take a look at things like, if you have a zip code field, does it have the name of a state in it? Actually, I just had that happen on implementation. You shouldn't clutter up your new AMS with dirty data. Data cleanup is time consuming, so do not wait to start this effort. There are also solutions available, such as Bumblebee by Association Trends, that can assist with this data cleanup. Also, be strategic with your data and your data placement. You don't have to simply lift and shift your data from the old AMS into the new one. Potentially rearrange your data fields in the new AMS for maximum efficiency. Or if you find you have two similar data sources with the same fields, consider merging them together into one standardized field. Also, look at your pick list values. Do those still make sense, or have those become outdated? Do you think you need to take a step back and maybe have your pick list values be broader or maybe more discrete? Or do you just want to abandon what you have altogether and start new? If you do plan to change them in your new AMS, consider creating a mapping template that identifies the old values and how it's going to convert into your new ones. These will become helpful during your migration process. When it comes to historical data, you can consider migrating it after go live. If you don't need access to it immediately at go live, consider waiting. That's okay. Data really is the most important piece of your AMS. Be sure you take the time to analyze, review, and clean it. Right. Next slide, Julie.
All right, thanks, Beth. So you've had all your conversations with the vendor, you filled out the questionnaire, you've had the interviews and talked about reports, data, integrations, all those key things. So now it's time to review their documentation. So really super important. You need to read this. This is not one of those times when you want to just rubber stamp something. This is basically what they're going to use to move forward with your configuration. So as you're reading through this, some things to be thinking about is, do they get it? It might seem super obvious, but you want to make sure that they really do understand what you need the system to do. You want to make sure that what they've written up tells not just the what you're looking for, but that why you're looking for what you're looking for. One of the things I should have mentioned is, you shouldn't rely just on the vendor taking the notes. So either someone at your organization should take that on, or I know when we work with clients, we typically take on that role, because you need to have a little check and balance to make sure, you don't want to just rely on the vendor to say, well, this is what we heard. You need something to check against to make sure is what they've captured actually complete. And I should have mentioned too, you might want to dust off your user stories from the selection to again be a check for the completeness of what they've captured. So typically when they do put everything together, there's going to be a little bit of an iterative process. So they should, provide the documentation to your team. You guys should be reading it, providing feedback, and then making sure that the vendor has incorporated any of that feedback into that final document, because again, that's what they're going to use as the roadmap for what they're actually going to configure for you. So once you have agreement on that final version, then they're going to turn around and give you the estimates for what it's going to cost to implement what they've put together. And as you're looking at the costs, we're going to get into a breakout activity in a minute, but you're really kind of doing a little bit of cost benefit analysis. Rebecca talked about this earlier, but it's not unusual for, after discovery to come in at a higher cost or more hours than what they told you during sales. So you really need to be looking at this strategically, doing a cost benefit analysis or identifying and teasing out your must-haves from your wants. So before we get into the breakout activity, are there any questions about this discovery process in this phase of the project? Anything in chat?
Well, people are thinking, I'm going to add this. So I think it's really tempting for organizations with their boards, and I understand that some of this is somewhat required, but there's this great temptation at the very beginning of that AMS selection when you're coming out of the sales project, or frankly, potentially even going in before the sales process altogether, where the board is going to say, how much is this going to cost? How much is this going to cost? How much is this going to cost? So if I could give any word of advice if you can in any way get your board to be amenable, you do not want to give them a budget until you hit this phase. You get them a very large swag at the very beginning, maybe, with lots and lots of caveats, with lots of, it depends, we don't know, we're going to find out, this is when we're going to be secure. So, and when we look in project management in terms of standard deviations, and I hope I'm not getting too like in the weeds for people, maybe I am, but we have way more standard deviations, way more iterations when we're further out because you have less that's known, right? So our ability to predict accurately with timeline and budget, and frankly, scope at the beginning of the phase is very, very, it's hard to do. It's very hard to estimate. When we get to this point, so you can see in the sales process, it feels, everybody's in these, feel good feelings and you're walking through the process and, the solutions are great. And you're thinking, wow, look at all this stuff we can do. This is great. This is great. And now when you get this requirement document back, it's not uncommon to go, wait a minute, we thought we were going to be able to do this and now we can't, or we can, but because we've added these 5 other requirements, it's going to cost us twice as much. You guys, that's not them slipping a Mickey on you. That is not a bait and switch. That's normal. The level of detail that you have in a selection versus the level of detail that you have now is appropriate. Expect additional scope, expect additional cost at this point in time. So prepare your board that that's what's going to happen if you can. This is when we lock down cost. This is when we lock down budget and say, okay, now I know what it's going to be. And I still would put a contingency on top of this. But this is when you're going to feel comfortable and confident that, hey, we're going to make it or we're not going to make it. So I'd add that in as a little bit of color commentary to what Beth and Marla have already teed up in terms of requirements. And then I'd also add in, in terms of the kind of where we are in the process. And I'd also talk a little bit about a little bit more about data conversion and how important that is, because it is 100% temptation that everybody wants everything in the new AMS. Resist, resist, resist. The answer is no. And the answer is no for a couple of reasons. Remember those cloud costs we talked about at the beginning? If you bring over 20 years of data, your costs just skyrocketed. The other thing that happens is your system is too damn cluttered. So you don't want to do that either, because then when somebody's learning a new system and they've got all this data in there and all this historical information, and frankly, it's overwhelming to them. So the advice that we have on data conversion is to literally keep it as skinny as business practical. Frankly, there are very rarely does someone go back and look at data that's years and years old. Maybe you bring over things like your award winners, but does it really matter that Johnny went to a particular meeting 10 years ago and that you've got his event registration? No, it really doesn't matter. You're never going to use that in marketing because Johnny's changed jobs 3 times since then. And Johnny's moved 6 times. So they've changed jobs and they've moved. So from a marketing standpoint, you're typically looking 3 to 5 years back at the most. When we do conversions, we're recommending 1 to 2 years of data coming over max. You really want to keep that skinny. That's your real actionable data, except for a handful of things that are truly historical that you need to bring over that are critical. So I tee that up again in terms of if you've got any questions for us, kind of additional information about data conversion and about what to expect during the vendor discovery process.
Rebecca, I was wondering if your statement about only bringing 1 or 2 years of data over is that if you would in any way modify that because of the pandemic.
No. Why do you think? Give me why you think that?
The last 2 years are somewhat of an aberration, and so they're not necessarily representative of standard history, and they could skew your analysis in the future, because if you're only doing 2 years, the bulk of it is either pandemic or post-pandemic. You know what I'm saying?
If you
So
have,
like maybe 2 years prior to the pandemic?
if you are not bringing over transactional data, then I could potentially go with some of that historical things like an attendee record and past events. I think I could probably get on board with it. If you have another way to access it or restore it, Rob, that's the route I would go. If you can access it differently. Um, that's probably what I would suggest. But if you need it because it's, you know, integrating with your marketing and you truly believe that you're going to pull actionable lists off that, then I could get behind some basic information. I wouldn't bring over transactional data because transactional data gets really messy really fast. I
I
would
hear
mostly just kind of attendee records in that case. And I definitely wouldn't bring over the other thing that we've seen people want to do, which is amazing to me, is I want to bring over 5 years of historical demographics. That I'd still say no to. I'm like, no, you need to bring over the demographics where they are today. Does it really matter that 5 years ago they were interested in X, Y, you know, whatever it is, right? So you know, you want to think about what's moving forward. So I could probably, I think with some attendance records get behind that. That's a good point, Rob. I hadn't gone there yet. Great question.
But what you're saying is make sure that what you include is actionable. There's got to be a reason you're going to use it for something and it's going to provide the value that you think it's going to.
That's correct. That's correct. You should not bring over data for data's sake.
Yeah.
Because you're accustomed to seeing 5 years of history on somebody's record. Well, okay, are you actually going to use that, Rob? That's a great question. I mean, that's exactly it. So if what you're going to do is you're going to make your marketing list specifically, like that's usually the reason to bring over historical data is for marketing reasons. And if you really want to see, you know, if you're going to generate true marketing lists out of that historical data, then you can get behind that to some degree.
Yeah. And that is what I have in mind. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great question. I hope that starts other questions. All right, so let's go on to the next then. So I think I'm teeing it up. I think I'm an official tear upper. So go on and hit the next one. So in the next one, we're going to go ahead and bring it in here. So here's what we know. We know it is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. What's going to happen is you're going to come back and we're going to have estimates that are going to be higher than you expect. And you're going to be faced with the decision of, wait a minute, what am I going to keep and what am I going to get rid of? You're never going to have a budget big enough, even if you put in contingencies. It does not make sense to build out the system to meet everyone's specifications to the nth degree. You need to be diligent and thoughtful and with ROI in mind as you go through and think about what you're going to either customize or configure and what you're not. And it needs to be done with kind of surgical precision and thoughtfulness about it. So we know that you're going to get to this point. So if you hit to the next one, and this is in there, and you know, again, we have these exercises and these takeouts because you could use these with your group as little breakout sessions before you start to say, hey, we're going to pretend that we're going to hear back from this AMS company and they're going to say it's going to cost us more. Let's walk through how we're going to go through the process. So the point of this little breakout session, and we'll bring these up on our screens when we're in the breakout so you can read them. So we can either read these specifically or we can talk about your organization in general. But we want to know, how would you deal with this situation? What is your thought process of going through what's going to hit the cutting room floor and what you're going to keep? Because knowing how you're going to go about that before you get faced with this literally in the heat of the moment is going to matter. It's going to matter. So why don't we go ahead and hit our breakouts and we'll talk about it.
Okay, here we go. Please bear with me.
Just real quick, I'm reposting those documents in the chat for everybody.
You mean the slide deck that we were just looking at?
Yeah, and at least my breakout session, I'll make sure that I'll be sharing that so we can all
And that's
take
exactly
a look.
what I'm about to do too. I'm just pulling it up if I can actually pull it up. Not my day today. All right.
Actually, Rob, not the slides, but there were some pre-documents that were sent out. So I'm reposting those. But you will get the presentation, is my understanding.
So Julie, you doing the breakouts?
I'm trying. I don't know.
That's great, thank you.
No, again, it's like being picked for the kickball team back in grade school.
I think she's building suspense.
I know. Come
Sure,
on,
that's what we'll call it.
Yeah.
When's it gonna happen?
Come on, Julie, you should be a pro.
Don't distract her, Rebecca.
Well, why don't we
Is it
not?
going? I don't understand.
Let's not do
why-
breakouts then. It's no
Yeah.
big deal.
Wait. There we go.
Great. That was a great point that you were making at the end, Pam.
Okay.
Order of operation. Yeah. Go to that in just a second. So who wants to start with ahas? Beth, Marla, do you mind again?
I'm going to ask either Beth or Tammy maybe to report out because I think people are tired of hearing me talk. Maybe not.
And really
Maybe
tired of hearing me talk.
If not, I will, but I'll give them an opportunity maybe to chime in first.
I think I'll just add that from our discussion, some of the ahas are identifying the key requirements that you initially set as needs during that initial discovery phase. What are the key pieces that you must have for your project to succeed, and focus on those areas first? Obviously, finance being a very core component of that, and likely membership being your second most section that is the most relevant and important. But also making sure that you have thoughtful conversations from your leadership perspective as well. If you do need to pare things down in order to phase sections out into a phase 1 or phase 2, have thoughtful conversations so that people's feelings don't get hurt if their particular section isn't implemented in phase 1. Making sure that there are real strategic decisions for which phase those items may go into, so that it impacts, it's an overall benefit to the whole organization just so that people don't get hurt feelings for their own particular department. Those were some of the key takeaways we had from our breakout.
Ours were similar. We were just starting to get to the idea of order of operation, and Pam was hitting that, focus on the steak, not the sizzle. It's, that's, you've got to really think about what is at the core of what you're doing and the building blocks that go along with it. So what do I have to have it go live? What's a nice to have? What could we do later? And I think that that's what she was really about to consider. A lot of people are really enamored by these really pretty dashboards. And I kind of laugh because they really, yes, they provide you some things, but you can get data and it not be in a pretty dashboard. But if you've got information going into your general ledger incorrectly, that's a whole different story. So you've got to do those fundamentals first. And so our conversation was really about making sure that whatever process you use, there's objectivity in it, and it's not the loudest voice in the room. Because sometimes, I mean, to your point, Tammy, about, again, going back to those earlier artifacts that we have, people are getting frustrated at this point in time. They want to make sure that they're championing their business. And so we want to make sure that it's not the loudest voice in the room, that it is indeed something that's strategically advantageous and operationally advantageous for the organization. You just don't want to go forward blindly. So I think that's really the important thing, is to have a process. So I think we're going to take another break. We're just past a little over 2 hours on this call. Another 10 minutes,
Another
Julie?
10 minutes, yep.
Glad to know I know where the bathroom is this time. I hope everybody knows where their restroom is. Take a little break and come back and finish up things.
All right, oh, let's see.
Groucho. That was Sean's answer.
I
I
love
think
it.
Sean's gonna get it right this time.
Yeah.
I'm a real boy.
I love it.
All right. It is
I never saw it. Okay, go.
Pinocchio. The
I'm a
genie.
real boy.
That's right.
Right, that's right. Way to go, Tim.
Right.
Sean, you really need to see it. Aladdin really is hilarious. I actually did really like Aladdin.
All right. We're ready to dive in?
We are.
All right. Oh, our lovely transitions are back. So your discovery is done. You've made decisions on what's being implemented. So now you need to put together your project schedule. So we find that sort of the 7 to 9 month time frame is kind of the sweet spot. If you get past 9 months or close to a year, you might get into a little bit of project fatigue with your team. So you need to start thinking about the go live timing. We talked about during the charter identifying any blackout dates or other things. So be taking those into consideration when coming up with your go live timing. You want to make sure you've identified any busy times for staff. And also, Rebecca kind of spoke to this earlier, but you definitely want to have buffer time for your testing, training, and any contingency, because if you think that testing is just going to take 3 days and that's what you plan for, most likely things are not going to go well. So just thinking about your go live timing, also make sure that you have a backup launch date. And again, I think we talked about this earlier before, but probably don't want to commit to a specific date with your board. Just, need to have some options available. So moving on and talking about the implementation kickoff on the next slide. Similar to Discovery, you're going to have a kickoff for this next phase of the project. And it's your opportunity to really pull everyone together, make sure everybody's on the same page moving forward. So sharing the Clifton strengths, definitely a good idea to have that strengths chart so you understand what everybody's bringing to the table. You want to review the requirements, not in detail. Want to do a deep dive at the kickoff, but make sure that everybody understands what's going to be implemented. Make sure that you've articulating scope. Again, I'll make another, pitch for including not just what's in scope, but what's out of scope. And all that time that you spent in the discovery talking about your success criteria, you should share it with the team at this point so everybody knows moving forward really what you're going to be looking to achieve when the project is done. Of course, you want to review major milestone dates for the project, and I like to provide kind of a high-level Gantt chart type of visual, gets people kind of out of the details and at a higher level, really what you're trying to accomplish time-wise. And then lastly, work on making sure you've got your project meeting cadence, determine that, and setting that cadence moving forward with the team. All right, so Rebecca, you're going to speak a little bit about the escalation plan.
Yeah, because once you've got the team in place and you know what the cadence is going to be, so this is when you're really starting to get into the groove of what's going to happen. And this is where your project sponsor comes into play. So definitely have what we're just going to call a decision-making framework in place. Again, we're not necessarily prescriptive on exactly what it has to be. It's more important that you have one. And that you've got a process that's going to go about for approving changes, understanding increases in budget, and what that is going to look like. So just be aware that you're constantly going to be reviewing these decisions. It happens almost on a monthly basis, if not more than that, that you're reviewing requests, changes, new scope, even in implementation at this point in time. So if you don't have a process in place, you can kind of get caught off guard. So make sure you've got one in place. And that the entire team is aware of it. The whole point of this is making sure that the person who's your designated PM isn't seen as the gatekeeper, and that's the point and takeaway there. They don't want, Marla mentioned this earlier, we don't want the PM on your side to be seen as someone who's playing favorites. So having that objective process in place keeps all those office politics down. Go ahead to the next page. So in terms of, so once you've got that escalation in there, you also want to make sure you've got a process in for what we're just going to call change requests. Again, making sure that you understand what the impact is. Some of these change requests can actually go back and because depending on when they're found in the process can impact things that have previously been implemented. So essentially what we recommend is to have a process that you identify that change. There is a dialogue about what the impact is. Does this only impact things moving forward? Do we need to go back in time? Does there need to be rework on other things that have already been delivered? Because what we haven't hit is the cadence of most of your implementations. Most of them are going to hit in sprints. So this is a little precursor. Most organizations and implementations are going to actually deliver in 2 to 4 week sprints to you once you get into the implementation. So you can see that's a lot of work that's going on. So if you don't take a moment to realize, wait a minute, what's the impact of this change? What am I going to have to retest that I've already tested? What may have to be reconfigured that I've already configured? That could really kind of, wreak havoc on a project schedule. And I know that one of the questions was, how do I keep things on time, on track, on budget, on schedule? Well, this is one of the keys to that process, is knowing what that looks like. Then you have the escalation for whether it's improved or denied, and then you kind of go through the process. So you've got to have something in there to make sure that you understand what's happening and what the overall impact is in time, budget, and time, budget, and resources. Head to the next page. So this is our little precursor on what's going to happen in the schedule, and I think Marla's really going to hit this. Because we know that it was great. Someone said, we haven't done implementations in a long time. Oh, if you've never done one or it's been a long time, the process has changed dramatically. So this is very typically what you're going to see, and Marla's going to cover this.
Yep, I was just going to say, in the past, perhaps, I know an implementation I did years ago, they sort of built everything, delivered it, and you test it all at one time. Now vendors, as Rebecca said, are delivering in either, some call it sprints, some call them iterations. For some vendors, it's maybe every 2 weeks. Others, it might be on a monthly basis. But just really understanding that you're going to be basically in constant test mode once they start delivering. So that can be really hard for people to kind of wrap their head around, because it's hard sometimes for people to test when they're not seeing the full process. So you might have at one of your initial deliveries, the membership setup. Might be farther on that you're getting the dues calculation, and maybe even farther on that you're doing getting the online renewal process, or getting people to understand that yes, you're just going to be testing that little component, but that end-to-end testing of really stringing everything together, you are going to get to that. It's just a little bit farther down in the process. So moving on to the next slide and talking a little bit about your test strategy. So in testing, you want to think about what your test plan is. So that means what functionality are you testing? What are your test cases? What are the conditions that you're using to execute those test cases? So really your test scenarios. And as you're pulling all of that together, you need to think about, well, who's on my team for testing? You know, what are their roles and responsibilities? You know, maybe you've got some folks that are executing, you know, one set of test cases, another group, another set of test cases, and then you obviously have to have somebody that's keeping track of how everybody is doing overall with the testing. You want to make sure you're testing in the right place. You know, some implementations, maybe you've got one site for one purpose, maybe everything else that you're testing is in a staging environment. Well, of course, you want to make sure everybody's going to the right location to execute their test cases. And then test results. Obviously, you want to keep track of how you're doing. So you need to be keeping track of issues that come up out of your testing. You also want to keep track overall of how are you doing on your test cases. You know, what's passed, what's failed. You just got to keep track of all of that information so you have a good idea of, well, where am I in this overall testing effort? And lastly, tying this all to project risks, as you're going through and doing your testing, you need to be thinking about, well, if there's a big issue, does that issue pose a risk to the overall project or implementation? So just being aware of that, because you might have a really big issue that could end up being a risk that's, you know, either perception of members of the system, or maybe just reputational risk for the organization if there's a big issue that came out of testing that you haven't addressed. So moving on to the next slide, I think Beth is going to talk a little bit more about your testing strategy.
Be prepared. You are going to be doing a lot of testing, but the good news is your testing is going to change over the life of the implementation. So you'll be doing different kinds of testing. Initially, you're going to start doing unit testing, which Marla referred to a little bit ago. And this is the type of testing that focuses on a very defined and contained piece of functionality. You're going to test that in all ways, shapes, and forms to ensure that it's working properly, it's meeting your needs, and it's meeting the requirements. As the vendor rolls out each new piece of functionality, you're going to unit test it. That means a lot of testing. After the unit testing, you're then going to move into your integrated and your regression tests. That's what Mara referred to, stringing some of those tests together, some of those pieces of functionality, some of those processes together into one test to ensure that they all work together properly. You're also going to be doing regression testing. Regression testing really focuses on ensuring that your core functionality continues to work as each new layer of functionality is implemented. You want to create these series of tests that just focus on those core systems, such as creating a record or selling a membership. Save these regression tests. You're going to be using them throughout the life of your AMS. And I'll touch base on those again in just a little bit. You're then going to move into your integration test. You're going to focus on your connections between your AMS and your other systems. And if you're unsure of what your other systems are, refer to your systems diagram that you built earlier. You're going to ensure that you're going to do this testing to ensure that they're properly talking together. This includes things such as your SSO or your member-only access to your systems. And then just prior to go live, you're going to reach your acceptance testing stage. This is the test of the full system to ensure all the functionality is working as expected and it's meeting the requirements. Acceptance testing should have participation from multiple business units within your organization. Confirmation of your acceptance testing is the signal that you are ready to go live. Okay. Unfortunately, go live does not signal the end of your testing. Throughout the life of your AMS, you should continue to perform your regression tests. That's why it was important that you save them. Perform your regression tests after each AMS upgrade or service pack, or when you implement new functionality in the future. They are extremely important. Okay, Julie, next slide. Okay, that's all well and good. We've done all of our testing, but I found a million bugs and a million issues and all these things. What do I do with all of these? How do I ensure that all of these are tracked properly and they all get resolved? You're going to need some kind of system to actually support this bug and issue tracking. Do not attempt to use email or instant messaging to track these issues. Ask Marla, she'll tell you it'll drive you insane. Okay, there are many systems out there that you can use for bug and issue tracking. Jira, Trello, Asana, as you'll see up here. These are just examples of a few of them. But when you are choosing one of these, make sure you have one that you can actually track a status and you can move an issue from one status to the next. Make sure you can identify who the owner of that issue is and that you can just store a description so you know what issue that really is referring to. And then once you choose a tool, use it. There is no point in selecting a tool if you aren't going to use it. Okay. Next slide, Julie. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Beth. And I have had attempted to track issues via email, and you will lose your mind quickly. So, and I'm sorry, my headset is getting a little feedback, so I'm sorry if I sound a little strange. But as you just saw with the last slide, you could end up having a lot of issues. It can be overwhelming. So you should definitely have something in place to help you assess and prioritize all the issues that are coming in. So the very first pass is really to identify, well, is it actually a bug? Is the functionality not working correctly? Because sometimes people will put in a bug that really is a new feature request. You know, maybe it's not something that was actually captured as part of the requirement. So in that case, you want to go ahead and, you know, indicate it's working as designed and put that perhaps in the queue for a new feature request down the road. If you do determine that, yes, this is a bug, then the next thing is to determine, well, is this critical to business? If it's not, then you can go ahead and put that on the backlog for, you know, addressing later if you so choose. If it is critical to business, then of course you want to fix it. So one thing to think about as you're kind of assessing things is, you know, your success criteria is going to help you assess some of these and prioritize kind of how important it is to you to get that addressed. And I would say in terms of really understanding what's critical to business, if the issue is causing bad data, probably want to fix it. If it is impacting your financials, that's probably also something that you want to fix. You know, if it's something that, yeah, it's affecting our membership, but maybe it's affecting just a smaller group, you know, you still would want to perhaps fix that, but then maybe that gets lowered, has a slightly lower priority than those other critical items that we mentioned. So just make sure going in that you have a way to, what I like to phrase is work the list, because you're going to have a lot of stuff coming through and you've got to have some way to work through that and be thinking towards your go live and making sure that you feel good about the system at the time of go live. So I think at this point, we're going to shift and talk a little bit about training and SOPs.
Similar to what Rebecca said earlier, implementations have changed and so have training and SOP. They've undergone quite a shift now. Gone are the days when you had full system in-person training right before go live, where your entire staff marched into an office together and you had a full week of training. And as you walked out, they handed you a large user manual. Okay. A lot more of the training now is available through self-learning or online training. Vendors are providing a lot more online training classes and offering online training documents and canned training videos for organizations to use. The organizations must take more initiative now to determine how and how much training their staff should receive. Some AMS vendors now are expecting that the core project team will attend vendor baseline training sessions at the beginning of the project or the implementation, and then the vendor is only going to train on their specific customizations during the remainder of the project. Other times, vendors are going to use the train the trainer model. That is when a small team of people are going to receive the full user training on the whole system capabilities, with the expectation that that smaller team is then going to train the rest of the organization's staff. When it comes to training, staff size can also matter. For those with a smaller size staff, it may make sense to invest in training for the entire staff. Larger size staffs may find the train the trainer model is more flexible for them and makes more sense financially. You may also find that you don't need to train all of your staff on all system functionality. It is okay just to train people on what it is they need to know to do their job. With whatever training model you choose or receive, just don't train too early. If you train too early, people are going to forget by the time you go live. It's just going to happen. Also remember, you are going to most likely be hiring new employees at some time in the future. They are going to need to be trained. Make sure you implement a new employee training program. Okay. All right. In addition to training, you're going to be creating your new SOPs. Okay. As I said earlier, your vendors are now providing a lot more online documents for you. These are going to be, you do not need to recreate these as SOPs of your own. Just reference these vendor documents. They're already there for your use. Focus your SOPs instead on functionality that has been customized for your organization during the implementation. Okay. Additionally, focus on specific tasks your people are going to need to perform. Create one SOP per task. Okay. Keep in mind, SOPs don't have to be step-by-step instructions with screenshots. In some cases, a more generalized description of the entire process is more useful. These are handy when you have a process that crosses multiple departments. Okay. SOP should also be considered living documents. Update and adjust them as your processes change over time and new functionality is implemented. Be sure to assign an SOP owner. This is going to be the person who is responsible for reviewing and modifying those SOPs as needed. Your SOPs should also include a little purpose statement. Why would I be using this SOP? What job am I trying to perform? And then include any assumptions you're making in it. Assumptions such as, I assume that an individual record already exists. Okay. Once you've created your SOPs, make sure your entire staff can access them. Store them in a central repository. Something as simple as a share site could work in this situation, but there are more robust programs that are available if you wanted to go out there and look for one of those as well.
Hey, Beth, a question just came in from Lou in regards to power usage. What percentage of, can you hear me?
I just read it. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's a question of what percentage of power users should you have compared to your staff and power users from different departments. I don't have a hard and fast number for you, Lou, but you should have at least one power user for a department. And then that person will be responsible for training the rest of their department. That we find that usually works pretty well. Or in some cases, we actually have another person that we're working with where they only have two. They have a staff size of about 30, but those two are extremely good at doing the training, and they have created a new employee training program that has worked extremely well for them. So as new people come in, they train them up and they get them out the door. And that model, if those new employees, after they've received that initial training, have questions, they do have a contact person within their department to then go to for more specialized questions later on as they continue to use the system. Did that help at all, Lou?
Yeah, great, thanks.
Okay.
I think the key takeaways here are one, I mean, Beth said it, don't train too early on this, especially on these specific tasks that they're going to be doing at their desk. In implementations, we typically see these days some sort of introductory training at the beginning from a platform basis. So it helps give organizations a little bit of context at the beginning so that they can understand some of the nomenclature, the taxonomy, the things that are coming along with the platform. But yet they're not really going to remember the implementation. Think about that. That's a 7 to 9 month process, right? Or longer, depending, right? So by the time you get to the end, you really do need to get to that specificity on the training. And that's what Beth's getting at. And if you do train them, there is a, people are always asking, when are we going to get trained? When are we going to train? When are we get trained? We find if we do it more than 1 to 2 weeks before go live, frankly, people don't remember and people forget. So it's really is a challenge, but you definitely want to push that off for your final end use trainers training as much as possible. The other point of emphasis on the SOPs is really these platforms have changed. 10 years ago, they actually did not, over time, it took a long time for the platform itself to really make a major sort of shift or change. With SaaS platforms in the market today, I mean, just think about all the upgrades we've had with Zoom, with Microsoft, everything. Your AMSs are much more akin to this type of software than to what they were 10 or 15 years ago. So they are constantly changing. So that emphasis on the balance of your SOPs, of them being specific enough that people can follow them, but not so detailed that you're having to spend more hours than you need to for having no return on that investment again, to make sure that people know what they're doing. But if the vendor already has resources that they're constantly updating, it doesn't make sense for you to recreate the wheel, which is what Beth said, right? It doesn't make sense for you to go recreate that into specific documents that say exactly the same thing in a PDF form that now sits there. And that living, breathing document is the third point that Beth made that I can't emphasize enough. You've got to have something that is fluid and is going to have that is going to be that can be accessed and accessible all the time. So you could use the wiki portion within Microsoft. That's one option. We like this thing called Confluence, but you need to have something that isn't this arcane. I need a drop it on my desk, 3-ring binder, spiral notebook, PDF file for our training. Because literally the minute you plop it on their desk in terms of their SOPs, like it's almost out of date straight away. So you really need to think of a modern approach to SOPs and to training moving forward. And that's really the point of emphasis of this is to be prepared for that, because you now have this living, breathing system that is going to be changing constantly. And you've got to be prepared for that going in and not over-engineer it at this point in the game. So that's kind of what implementation looks like. If you heard nothing at all, hear that it's going to be a lot of testing.
And yeah, over and over and over
and over and over and over again. And we're very glad that's a capitalizable cost. But it's going to be a lot of testing because of the way the deployments are coming out and what you're going to need to prepare for. And that, I think, in the implementation phase, I think that is the thing that most organizations are not prepared for. There's a mindset that after they get done with discovery, that the vendor or the solution provider is going to go away. They're going to develop everything, and then they're going to come back, and it's going to be like Christmas, and they're just going to open up the packages, and it's going to be awesome, right? When it's not like Christmas, it's actually a lot more like Groundhog Day, that you are literally doing like every 3 to 4 weeks, the same thing again and again and again and again, because that's what's going to make sure that your system is safeguarded at the time you go live. So I'm sad to say it's not as much like Christmas. It is a little more like a Groundhog Day. So we had a great question. What's the timing for UAT and training? So it's a little chicken and an egg. I don't know. Do you want to handle this, Beth? I mean, it's a little chicken and egg because you have to train enough to get people through UAT, which they should actually get in their testing. But for the most part, truly training on your SOPs is going to come after UAT. So really the training should come after UAT, but there is this little bit of training that you kind of got to do kind of along the way to make sure, and they should be doing it in what they either call their sprint, their iterations, whatever they're called, kind of their rollouts. You should be getting some of that to get you to UAT. So there should be enough base knowledge to actually get you to UAT without having to do full-on training. So but you have to do a little bit to get to UAT as well, but it's not as much. So mostly it's after though. Great question, Doug. Other questions on what to expect during implementation? All right. So now you're there. And I think this is kind of what it looks like. Are you ready? Go ahead to the next one. So once you get through everything, we really are going to begin to prepare for launch. So we'll head on to the next slide. And what are the indicators that you're ready? So we call it go, no go, right? We want to know, where are we? What's happening? What does it look like? So before you, to get ready for that, the questions you need to ask yourself are truly, is your configuration complete or complete enough? What do I have to go live with? What does that look like? And that is, it's a simple, but yet not an easy task. It's a simple question, but it is not an easy task, because there are a lot of things that people will think need to be in phase one that frankly don't. So configuration complete. There is a collective freak out, and I don't know, I can't remember if we have it on the slides here, but essentially about 6 weeks out, somewhere as you're beginning to wrap up unit testing and you're really getting into UAT, be prepared for the freak out. And somebody in the organization is going to say, we can't go, we're not ready. It doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. We can't, we just can't. That is normal. It's going to happen. It's the freak out. We know what it looks like. We can identify it. You should take bets at the beginning on your project of who it's going to be, because you probably already know who it's going to be. But that's know what's going to happen. So that's why I say configuration complete. It's a nuanced question. You've got to have confidence in your data conversion, so you know what that looks like. Your testing, your staffing, and your training. So when you have a level of confidence, keep in mind, we are not shooting for perfection. This is an 80-20 rule at this time, because if you require perfection to get you across the finish line, your cost overruns. People said, how do I keep in scope and cost? Again, your cost overruns will be astronomical if you're not willing to actually push the button and go live. Because shooting perfection is the enemy of good at this point in time. And that's something you just absolutely have to remember as you begin to go into live. So think about those sorts of things. When the freak out happens, you do the I told you so dance, and that's what happens. And then make sure that you push through it. So, who's going to sell it for you, because you've already identified that at the beginning of the project, who's going to sell that we're going to go live. So let's go ahead and so what you're going to do when you put together your launch plan is you should have a very explicit and specific checklist. And this is going to include, different things from the vendor side, from your integration side, from your staff side. You're going to have a rollback plan, always a plan B. How are we going to go back in time? You're going to have communications. Who are you communicating? When are you communicating? Making sure that that's all in place as well. So there's a lot of checklisty sort of things that come as you begin to put together these launch plans. And you should begin these before you make your go, no go decision, frankly. But this is really what your launch plans look like as you begin to pull this out. So lots of checklists to get everything's ready, and make sure that you don't forget the communications, because that is something a lot of people think about, only the technical aspects, but forget about things like, hey, we need to say, we're going down and on the website, and SSO won't be available, or you can't do member transactions, or you should be prepared for X amount of times of dark. So really, what does that communication look like? And people tend to forget about the external communications on those. Head to the next. So once you have everything in place, what you're going to do, and everybody's required to do it, is you will have a lockdown period. It will be dark. It really is true. So typically what this means is when you're doing the transition and you're saying, we're no longer taking transactions in the system, we're moving them over to this, to our new AMS. We really are stopping all activities in the old system. One of the questions we're frequently asked is, should we run 2 systems in parallel for the next couple months? Hell no. Hell to the no. If you can at all avoid it, I have yet to see a really good business reason why somebody needs to do that. No one has made a strong enough argument for me to say we've got to be running in parallel systems. I'm sure that I'll eat those words the next implementation we have, now that it's come out of my mouth, but no one has yet to present a business argument. If you've got to run in parallel systems, my opinion, you're not ready for launch. There you go. Not ready. Big indicator if you don't have enough trust in your new system that you're going to be running in parallel. Not ready for launch then. So what happens, you go dark, you go down, you basically close out and get all of your reconciliations ready. And then you begin to think about what that data conversion is going into the new system. So really everybody out. That's what we say. It's called lockout or lockdown for a reason, is everybody's out. And head to the next one. So, so you're going to go dark. This is when you're bringing over the final conversion. At this point in time, also plan for buffer in your conversion schedule. Things are going to happen. A report you thought was going to run is not going to run. You're going to have an issue with data conversion that you've never had before. It's going to take longer. You may have to rerun something. So what you don't want to do here is have too aggressive of a launch timeframe that you're not allowing people to think thoughtfully and thoroughly about reconciliation and a whole bunch of other processes that are going to go with it to make that transition. So give yourself plenty of time to make sure that you have buffer in your actual go live schedule so that you don't feel pressured. I try not to give a date at all if I can avoid it, to say this is when we're going to be back up. If I do have to give a date, I give it way further out than I truly expect it. I really do plan for worst case scenario. The place that we're at right now, I think that actually we're going to be ready 2 days before what we promised. That's a much better message to your board of directors than 2 days after we promised. So that's kind of how you want to go into your final go live launch period. Want to head to the next? I kind of hit this a little bit. Sorry, it's a little bit redundant. So when you're finally there and you start to, the financial reconciliation is the key component. Yes, you're doing testing. So the order of operation should be this. The very first thing you do is a financial validation. You make sure that you can tie out your accounts receivable and all of the revenue into the new system so that you pass your financial audit clear and clean. So revenue from old system into new system, accounts receivable from old system into new system, deferred revenue position from old system into new system. Do not enter any live transactions in a system until that reconciliation is done. And the reason for that is it's much more difficult to roll back once you start taking live transactions. So this is the reason for the extended dark period. So reconciliation first, and only when that reconciliation is signed off on, do you begin to process new transactions. Those live orders, the first orders that you're going to take are going to be back office orders, not to your membership. You're going to run down a list of all the different types of transactions that you expect to do. And you're going to do little mini transactions that you may refund to make sure that your general ledger transactions and your all your accounts and GLs are coming over exactly as you expect. So you have an entire laundry list of every single one of them to make sure that they're coming over. Why? Those are test transactions. Again, much easier to roll back. If there's something that's not going right, then you can't go back to the old system once you start. Well, you can, but it just makes it much more difficult once you start taking live member transactions in there. Once that's done, then you open it up to the public. So in terms of order of operation, whether you do this internally, work with us or any other sort of consultant, if you do not go through this process, I mean, this is best practice. This is what keeps you from losing your jobs. So important to follow this. Do this. Anybody who recommends otherwise, don't work with them. All right. So then, as you see, I've already kind of hit this. We've got all the externals. Then when everybody comes in, what we recommend people do is, if you can, have them bring their daily work. You're going to have that information that that you're going to have these several days. Some people take up to a week to actually make the transition. We like to make it in about 3 to 4 days if we can. Have them bring their daily work with them. Have a representative from everybody that's doing transactions into the system. And have them, if you can, when you can do it in person, be in the same room with the people who have implemented the system and know the most. So those true subject matter experts in the system. And the reason for that is when people go back into their little cubbies, they're much less likely to raise their hand and say, I've made a mistake. They're much less likely to ask the question. So when you've got someone there that you can just look up and look across the table and ask, hey, how do I do this? Or did I do this right? Or can you check my work? People are much more inclined to do that. So it kind of adds this, like, dare I say this, social pressure to, it's peer pressure to make sure that we're doing it right within the system. And we can celebrate those along the way. So we do a lot of celebrations, like first membership brought in, first, first transactions, first batch closed, just kind of having a little fun with it so that people can feel like they're making progress and be supportive. So in this transition, we really believe that that's what they should be doing, is coming together if you can and working on the system together. What I'll let you know is this is also a freak out day, because any organization that has gone in and said, you're going to be so much more efficient in your new system, hooey ha ha. No, in about a year, in about 6 to 9 months, maybe. But people are going to love their old system on this day because it's what they know. It's what they're comfortable with. So that's important to understand, that bringing them in the room and being able to set the tone is important, because right now it's like they've walked into their first day of a new job and they're going to be really uncomfortable with that. And so it's really important to know how to build that supportive environment. Want to head to the next slide? So we recommend that you work in that style for the first week if you can. So working together in a room or in the same kind of co-located to make sure that everybody's doing things together makes a lot of sense. But what we also need to know and understand is you gotta set the tone for setting good habits and examples. And really your focus for the first 3 months is on data integrity. Don't expect the system to be perfect, and expect that you're going to do rework. A lot of people think, again, oh, it's going to be perfect when I get in there. And that's just not a realistic expectation. There are going to be things that you miss that you really are going to think about literally within the first 30 days. We have one of our sayings is to give grace. So that's the nice way of saying don't expect perfection. So we need to give grace if we're going to receive grace. So you need to make sure that you're giving grace to a lot of your team members going forward, so they understand that they're not expected to be perfect. Because if you expect perfection, what we know is people will hide their mistakes, and they're going to be much more obtuse and difficult to find. But if you have an open posture and mistakes are welcome, then you're going to have cleaner data, and you're actually going to get better buy into the system long term. So relinquish people from perfectionism at go live for sure. And moving forward, go ahead, next slide. So now imagine yourself, we're right there. So now here at the very end, expect that you're going to balance these 3 things going forward. You're going to balance the fact that you're going to have new requests and new projects all the time. feature requests, and other questions. And so it becomes this constant balancing act with the new systems as you go forward, of figuring out what that looks like. Because we don't want you to become discontent with systems within the first 2 years of you being in them. That's really uncomfortable for everybody. So making sure that you've got this proper balance of accelerating the organization on those strategic things, making sure you're keeping up with upgrades, but also tending to the basic care and feeding of a new report or a question asked. And that's going to be a constant balancing act that you have going forward in these new systems. So want to set that expectation of what to expect. And this is going to be your life moving forward. And you want to make sure that not one of them just gets off kilter, that they're always kind of in balance. And the next. So we said at the very beginning, get accustomed to being able to tell your story again and again and again. Well, guess what, guys? You get to tell it again. So now you go from sales to implementation. You now either love or hate your implementation team by now. It's usually one of the two, nothing in between. So now you've got to go to support. So what you need to know as an organization is it's time to embrace it, embrace that transition to support, and to tell your story again. No one's going to tell the story as well as you do. Just the way the handoff was from sales to implementation, implementation to support. Be your voice, be your champion. So take advantage of that. Don't let that opportunity go wasted. We see a lot of people, they're tired, they're burned out, they don't want to do it. So make sure that you tell your story. Make sure that you keep ways that you got the staff engaged moving forward. Make sure you've got data standards. So we recommend getting kind of a group together. You meet monthly for the first year. You're talking about data standards. You're making sure that questions are asked and answered. So make sure you've got these working sessions and a framework in order to keep that core team engaged. There's a temptation to just kind of disperse after that. Doing so really does wreak havoc and potentially can risk all the effort that you just put to work. So keep that core team engaged after you go live, even though they may want a temptation. And finally, as we've got in here, really reinforce that this is a never-ending program. So everybody thinks, hey, I'm at go live, I'm done. You know, this is the finish line. It's actually the beginning. It's actually the starting line. So that's the thing you really want to keep in mind is it's the start of the new journey, and you now have a program. It's not a project, it's a program. And so how you actually give care and feeding to that moving forward is going to be really important. So take what you put together in the best practices for your implementation and apply to those to the ongoing program afterwards. And that's really what we see as the key to success. And although we'd love to see you back here at AMS Fest in a couple of years, hopefully it's just to share your success story and not because you're looking for another AMS straight away. That's what we're trying to help you avoid here, is that you get that long-term investment out of your AMS. And that is really all that we have for today. I hope that wasn't too much. I see we've got one question about bringing your daily work, and happy to answer to that, but we are happy to stay as long as you like. If you need to go, we understand, but also to answer any questions that you have. So we wanted to take you up to launch, but we did want to hit a little after launch, because we do feel like that's where things kind of can fall flat. And if you're not prepared for that and thinking about launch or the implementation with the end game in mind and what sustainability looks like, that can be problematic. So the two questions are, what do you mean bring your daily work to launch? So that's all your processing, your memberships, that you're closing batches, updating membership records, any sort of processing that you're doing in the system, bring that. Have the people who are in charge and responsible for performing those functions to bring those into your to the launch room. And by when should we expect operating efficiency? It depends on kind of your staff. Definitely not before 6 months. We see it somewhere between kind of the 9-month and 12-month mark. You really need to get through almost an entire work cycle to really begin to see operating efficiencies and gains in the system. Would anyone on the team disagree with that? Would you say that that's been our observation? And it's important to set expectations with senior management and the board of directors of what that's going to be, that it is going to take some time to settle into a new system. It does take about a year.
And Rebecca, I'm going to add one other thing to that.
Mhm.
Not only does it take a year to settle in from a process perspective, but also from a trust perspective. Many
Yes.
times people are coming off of systems that they simply don't trust. And it will take a period of time for you to actually be able to trust and rely on your new system, that it is in fact giving you the right numbers.
Yep.
I would also like to chime in though, you're going to have some people who are going to get it and they're going to get it fast and they're going to embrace it and they are going to run with it. They are going to be your cheerleaders. They're going to be excited. They're going to drag their friends in to use it. So, there are going to be those people who are just going to get in, become efficient immediately and, those kind of things. So, there are going to have those people too.
Yeah. And then you'll have the opposite. Then you'll have some people that frankly will never get it. And that can be a little challenging from a staffing step perspective. There'll be some people that just will not embrace a new system if you've been on one for a very, very long time. So you'll see the entire spectrum, but take advantage of those champions. Like Beth said, you'll have a couple. And so one of the questions earlier on was like, how do you identify the BA? That could be that person who really is getting it quick, fast, and embracing it. That could be someone who really serves as kind of a bridge and a champion and a more potentially kind of PMBA role moving forward. That could be a real champion for you. So kind of keep your eyes out for that as you're going through an implementation.
Just in case anyone has missed it, the survey link that you're currently seeing in front of you is also in the chat.
Great. Other questions? I know we're a little bit over, about 11 minutes or so. Appreciate you sticking with us. It's a lot of material. Implementations, are hard. They're so important, and you're making such a big investment that we really want to take the time when we do this boot camp to go through this thoroughly, so you guys understand kind of the nuances that you're about to embark on and be prepared for this. Because it is a capital spend for, it's usually going to the board and asking for quite a significant sum of money. So setting you up for long-term success, we think is really important. So appreciate you being interested in this and taking the time to spend your afternoon and some extra time with us this afternoon. But we'll hang on if you've got other questions individually, if you'd like, but feel free to go. Get your CIE code. Don't forget that.
Thank you. I was just going to remind everybody it's there.
I just wanted to jump on quick. Oh, you have it there. Okay. I just wanted to jump on and make sure everybody knew the code, and Jamie had to jump off, but just wanted to come in and say thank you. And thank you everyone for sticking around with us for all of AMS Fest and doing the virtual world one last time. Hopefully we never have to go back in there. But thank you to the team at A Church for a great boot camp. I hope it really helped everyone after everything they took in these past 2 days. But thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And if anybody didn't receive the survey to put the CIE codes in, let me know, but you should have gotten it this morning. But just send me an email if not.
Also happy to answer questions offline. If you've got questions, I think our contact information is somewhere. Yeah. Alrighty.
Oh, the code is A Church.
Mhm.
It's on this slide too.
Yep.
Thank you again.
Yep.
Thanks. Great
Welcome.
session. Nice, clear, concise slides. Thank you.
You're welcome, Lou. Good luck. I know you're about to embark on the journey.
Yes.
Go forward and prosper. You'll be
I was
great.
gonna say, may the force be with you. I can't say the force be with you. That was hard to spit out. Sorry.
Exactly.
Everyone.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm glad you got something out of it. Any questions you have? And Sean, I loved your, we're in boot camp. We don't know. That was great. I love it. Thank you so much. That was great.
For recording and slides, do those automatically get sent, or do we reach out to someone?
No, it'll be all the links to everything, the slides, the recording, all of that will be in a follow-up email that I'm putting together that I will be sending later today. So, but just check your junk folder. Sometimes stuff ends up there. And if Monday, if you still don't see it, then I'll put my, you can send it to, you can at info@achurchconsulting.com, or I'll put my, my email in there too. And just let me know and I'll forward it.
Okay, thanks very much.
You're
Great
welcome.
presentation.
Great to see you.
What geographical location is your consultancy out of?
We are a fully remote company. We have team members in the DC area, Charlotte, Chicago, Michigan, California. Where am I missing? New Hampshire,
Denver.
Denver. Yeah, we are a fully remote company.
Cool.
We have all time zones covered. I
We
think.
do.
We do.
Who's on the West Coast?
On our West Coast is
Oh,
No one on this.
team. No one on this team is on the West Coast.
Oh, okay.
But
But we do have
have people on our remote team.
three.
Cool. Well, good job, guys. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. You know, today technically is a holiday for us.
Well, thank you.
I saw
Appreciate you
that.
joining.
Special.
Yep.
Yep, absolutely. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You
All
too.
right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Are you going to end the record? Ending the recording, Julie?